In the late summer of 1997, the world was still fascinated by the life of Princess Diana, a woman who had become one of the most loved public figures in modern history. Even after her divorce from King Charles III, who at that time was known as the Prince of Wales, she remained constantly in the spotlight. People around the world admired her kindness, her charity work, and the way she connected with ordinary people. She was often called the people's princess because she showed warmth and compassion that many felt was rare among royal figures. However, the same fame that made her so loved also brought intense pressure. The media followed her everywhere. Photographers chased her day and night, hoping to capture the next photograph that would sell newspapers and magazines. This endless attention created a life where privacy was almost impossible. Every relationship she had, every trip she took, and every public appearance was closely watched by cameras. By the summer of 1997, Diana was trying to move forward with her life and find happiness again. She was spending time with Dodi Fayed, the son of wealthy businessman Mohammed Al Fayed. The two were seen together during a vacation in the Mediterranean and later traveled to Paris, where they hoped to spend a quiet evening away from the constant media attention. But what happened during the early hours of August 31st, 1997, would shock the entire world and become one of the most discussed tragedies in modern history. That night in Paris began like many other nights for Diana during that period of her life. She and Dodi Fayed had been staying at the famous Hotel Ritz Paris, a luxurious hotel owned by Dodi's father. As expected, photographers had gathered outside the building, waiting for even a small glimpse of the famous couple. In order to avoid the crowd, a plan was made for Diana and Dodi to leave the hotel quietly through a back exit. They entered a black Mercedes car driven by Henri Paul, who was working for the hotel that night. Sitting in the front passenger seat was bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones, whose job was to protect them during their journey. The plan seemed simple. The car would drive quickly through the city streets and take them to a private apartment where they could finally relax away from the cameras. But as the car left the hotel, several photographers quickly jumped onto motorcycles and into cars, determined to follow them. The chase through the streets of Paris became dangerous within minutes. Witnesses later said that motorcycles were speeding behind the Mercedes, while cameras flashed continuously. The driver attempted to move quickly through traffic to escape them. As the car entered the Pont El Alma tunnel, something went terribly wrong. The Mercedes lost control and crashed violently into a pillar inside the tunnel. The sound of the crash echoed through the underground road, and within seconds a night that began like any other had turned into a terrible disaster. The crash left the car badly destroyed, and the people inside were severely injured. Emergency responders rushed to the scene as soon as the accident was reported. Paramedics found that both the driver Henri Paul and Dodi Fayed had died from the impacted crash. Bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones was badly injured but still alive. Princess Diana, however, was found in critical condition. Although she had suffered very serious injuries, she was still breathing. Paramedics worked quickly to stabilize her and carefully remove her from the wreckage. Because of the severity of her injuries, every movement had to be done slowly to avoid making the damage worse. The decision was made to take her to the nearby Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital, one of the largest and most respected hospitals in Paris. During the ambulance ride, doctors and paramedics tried to keep her stable, giving her oxygen and monitoring her heartbeat. At this moment, very few people in the world knew how serious the situation really was. Outside the hospital, however, reporters were already beginning to gather as news of the crash started spreading. Inside the hospital walls, a team of doctors prepared to fight for the life of one of the most famous women in the world. Among them was a young surgeon who would soon face one of the most difficult moments of his entire career. For him and his team, the patient arriving that night was not simply a royal figure or a global celebrity. She was a critically injured person whose life depended on the skill, speed, and determination of the doctors who were about to treat her. When the ambulance carrying Princess Diana finally arrived at Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris, the situation inside the emergency department immediately became tense and urgent. Medical staff had already been alerted that a very serious accident victim was on the way, but the full reality of the situation only became clear once she was brought inside the hospital. At first, many of the doctors and nurses did not even realize that the patient was the Princess of Wales. to them. She was simply a woman who had suffered life-threatening injuries in a car crash. However, it quickly became clear that the injuries were extremely serious and that every second mattered. The medical team began their emergency procedures right away. Doctors checked her breathing, measured her blood pressure, and examined the visible injuries from the crash. Some injuries could be seen immediately, but the most dangerous ones were hidden deep inside her body. In severe accidents like this, internal bleeding is often the biggest threat because it can quickly cause the body to lose too much blood. The doctors knew they had to find out exactly what was happening inside her chest and abdomen. Advanced scans and medical tests were performed as quickly as possible. Within a short time, the medical team discovered something extremely alarming. Diana had suffered a severe injury to one of the major blood vessels near her heart. This injury was not visible from the outside, but it was causing massive internal bleeding that could quickly become fatal if it was not controlled. The doctors immediately realized that saving her life would require a difficult and risky operation. At the center of this emergency effort was a young surgeon who had been working at the hospital that night. Although he was still relatively early in his career, he suddenly found himself leading the fight to save one of the most famous people in the world. Later, he would speak about how overwhelming that moment felt. In the operating room, however, the doctors tried to ignore the identity of the patient and focus only on the medical emergency in front of them. For surgeons, every patient must be treated with the same level of care and professionalism, whether they are a famous public figure or an unknown person. The team prepared for emergency surgery, knowing that the damage inside her chest was severe. The scans had revealed that a blood vessel known as the pulmonary vein had been torn during the crash. This vein carries oxygen-rich blood from the lungs to the heart, and when it is damaged, the body can lose blood very quickly. Injuries to this area are extremely difficult to treat because the vessel is located deep inside the chest near the heart. In many cases, people with this type of injury do not survive long enough to reach the hospital. The fact that Diana was still alive gave the doctors a small window of hope, but they also understood how dangerous the situation was. The operating room quickly filled with surgeons, nurses, and medical specialists who were all working together to prepare for the life-saving procedure as the operation began. The medical team focused on controlling the internal bleeding and repairing the damaged blood vessel. The surgeons performed an emergency procedure that required opening the chest so they could reach the heart and lungs directly. This type of surgery is only done in the most critical situations because it carries very high risks. The doctors had to work quickly, but also very carefully. Every movement inside the chest required great precision. If even a small mistake occurred, it could cause more damage or lead to further blood loss. At the same time, other members of the medical team were working to keep Diana's heart beating and her blood circulating through her body. Machines monitored her vital signs, while nurses provided medications and blood transfusions to replace the blood she had already lost. The atmosphere in the operating room was intense and focused. Although the doctors were trained for emergencies like this, they knew that the injuries they were facing were extremely serious. Despite the pressure and the growing tension, the medical team continued working with determination. Their goal was clear: stop the bleeding, repair the damaged vein, and give their patient a chance to survive. For nearly an hour, they fought against the damage caused by the crash, using every skill and medical tool available to them. But as time passed, it became increasingly clear that the injuries were far more severe than anyone had first hoped. Inside the operating room at Piti-Salpêtrière Hospital, the doctors continued their desperate attempt to save Princess Diana. By this point, the medical team fully understood how severe her injuries were. The crash inside the Ponte El Alma tunnel had caused powerful forces to move through her body, damaging several internal structures that were essential for survival. While the doctors had already discovered the torn pulmonary vein, the surgery revealed even more complications that made the situation far worse than they had first believed. When the surgeons opened her chest to access the damaged blood vessel, they saw that the force of the crash had also injured the area around the heart. The protective sac surrounding the heart, known as the pericardium, had been torn. This kind of damage often happens in extremely violent impacts because the sudden stop causes the organs inside the body to shift quickly. When the heart and surrounding blood vessels move suddenly like this, delicate tissues can tear under the pressure. for the doctors working that night. This discovery was deeply troubling because it meant the injuries were not limited to a single damaged vein. Instead, multiple structures inside her chest had been affected, making the surgery even more complex and dangerous as the surgeons worked to repair the pulmonary vein. They faced another serious challenge. Diana had already lost a large amount of blood by the time she reached the hospital. Massive internal bleeding is one of the most dangerous consequences of high-speed accidents because it can cause blood pressure to drop rapidly. When blood pressure falls too low, the body's organs, including the brain and heart, can no longer receive the oxygen they need to function. To prevent this from happening, the medical team had to replace the lost blood while also trying to repair the damaged vessel. Nurses and specialists quickly began providing blood transfusions, while machines monitored every change in her vital signs. Each member of the team had a specific role. Some focused on the surgical repair, others managed medications and transfusions, and others carefully watched the monitors that displayed her heartbeat and blood pressure. The room was filled with quiet urgency as everyone worked together. Even though the situation was extremely difficult, the doctors continued to fight for every possible chance of survival. During surgeries like this, time becomes the most important factor. The longer severe bleeding continues, the harder it becomes for the body to recover. The doctors knew they had only a limited window to control the bleeding and stabilize her heart. For a brief moment during the operation, it seemed as though they might be able to repair the damage. The surgeons worked carefully around the heart, attempting to close the tear in the pulmonary vein and stop the flow of blood escaping into the chest. However, the injury was located in a very difficult place where the vein connects closely to the heart itself. This area is extremely delicate, and even experienced surgeons face enormous challenges when operating there. Despite their skill and determination, the doctors began to realize that the damage might be too severe to fully repair. The force of the crash had caused trauma deep inside the chest that was not easily reversed by surgery as the operation continued. The situation became even more critical when Diana's heart suddenly began to struggle. Her heart rhythm became unstable, which is a common sign that the body is under extreme stress and losing too much blood. When the heart cannot pump effectively, the entire body quickly begins to fail. The medical team immediately shifted part of their focus to stabilizing the heart. Medications were given to try to support its function, and the surgeons carefully continued their work while monitoring every change on the heart monitor. Moments like these are among the most intense experiences a medical team can face. Each second feels longer, and every small improvement brings a brief sense of hope. But in Diana's case, the damage caused by the accident continued to push her body toward a dangerous limit. The surgeons were not only battling the torn blood vessel anymore, they were also fighting to keep her heart working long enough for the repair to succeed. As the minutes passed, the room grew quieter and more tense, with everyone understanding that the outcome of this operation would soon determine whether the Princess of Wales would survive the terrible crash that had changed the course of history. As the operation continued inside Pity-Salpêtrière Hospital, the medical team realized they were entering the most critical phase of their battle to save Princess Diana. Despite their efforts to repair the torn pulmonary vein and control the internal bleeding caused by the crash in the Ponte Elma tunnel, her body was beginning to show clear signs of extreme trauma. The heart, which had already been struggling to pump blood to the damaged circulatory system, suddenly began to fail. The steady rhythm displayed on the heart monitor started to slow and then became dangerously irregular. In an operating room, this is one of the most frightening moments doctors can face. Every person in the room immediately understood what was happening. Diana was going into cardiac arrest, meaning her heart was no longer able to pump blood effectively through her body. Without quick action, the brain and other vital organs would begin to lose oxygen within minutes. The surgeons and nurses immediately switched their focus to emergency resuscitation procedures. Their goal was to restart the heart and restore circulation before it was too late. One of the most dramatic procedures performed during this moment was direct cardiac massage. Because Diana's chest had already been opened during the surgery, the surgeon could reach her heart directly with his hands. This allowed him to manually squeeze the heart in a steady rhythm, forcing blood to move through the body. It is a powerful but exhausting technique that is only used in the most extreme situations when the heart has stopped beating on its own. At the same time, Other members of the medical team began using a defibrillator, a machine that sent controlled electrical shocks through the heart in an attempt to restore a normal heartbeat. Each shock was delivered with careful timing, while the surgeon continued pumping the heart by hand. Medications were also injected directly into the bloodstream to stimulate the heart muscle and encourage it to begin beating again. These drugs, including powerful stimulants like adrenaline, are designed to help restart the heart during cardiac arrest. In many emergency situations, these combined efforts can bring a patient back to life. But in Diana's case, the damage to her body made the process far more difficult. The operating room was filled with tension as the doctors repeated these life-saving attempts again and again. Each time the defibrillator delivered shock, everyone in the room looked toward the heart monitor, hoping to see the return of a steady heartbeat. Sometimes the heart briefly responded, showing a faint rhythm on the monitor, but the improvement did not last. The internal injuries and blood loss had placed enormous stress on her body. Even though the medical team continued their efforts with determination, the signs of recovery remained weak. Minutes passed, and the team kept working with intense focus. Direct cardiac massage continued as surgeons attempted to maintain blood flow to the brain. Nurses quickly prepared additional medications and blood transfusions, while carefully watching the monitors for any positive change. In moments like this, doctors must balance hope with realism. They are trained to continue fighting for as long as there is even a small chance of recovery. But they also understand that some injuries are simply too severe for the body to overcome. The effort to restart Diana's heart lasted far longer than most emergency resuscitation attempts. For nearly an hour, the doctors refused to give up. They repeated the same procedures again and again, hoping that the next attempt might finally restore a stable heartbeat. The room